what I found early in my improv experience was that the things that I was learning and getting to experience as an improviser were things that were really helping me as an entrepreneur, like being able to be in the moment and not like anticipate so much, but just trust myself, build that trust in myself that whatever came, I'd be able to handle it. I didn't have to like think or worry so much about what I was going to say or how I was going to show up. I just got to be me.
Welcome to Girls Make Bank, the podcast show for women who want to learn the art of selling for business and for life. I'm Jack White, seasoned sales professional, entrepreneur, and owner of Honeybees Group. Come back each week to hear inspiring stories from some of our favorite female business owners. Learn how to take the ick out of selling and make bank. We're all in this together, so let's get started. Hi, and welcome to another episode of Girls Make Bank. We teach women how to sell with authenticity and effectiveness. I am super excited today to explore a topic that I think is really interesting with a woman that I think is really interesting. Welcome, Mary Lemmer, to the show. Thanks, Mary, for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm glad to be here.
And we are glad to have you. Can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your background and how you started getting into improv and building your company?
Sure. Yeah. So it started with gelato, actually. As a teenager, I started a gelato business with my family and my younger brother as my business partner. And I, as any young person and first-time entrepreneur, was figuring it out as I went along. And there were a lot of things that didn't go as planned, and a lot of ways of coping with those things that didn't go as planned that weren't so great. And so when things there'd be like a wrench in my day, or I like to give the example of the gelato case would break and all the gelato would be like melted everywhere. And then I'd spend my whole day dealing with this thing when I had all these other things I'd planned to do. It would really put me in disarray and stress me out to the point of experiencing a lot of anxiety and panic. And so I had one moment where I just kind of hit a wall, and it was just a series of events that inspired me to be like, you know what? I need to figure out a way to deal with these things better because this isn't sustainable. And so I took a little vacation, one of the first vacations I took since being an entrepreneur. And I came back and I signed up for an improv class kind of on a whim. And I'd always had an interest, I think, in acting and performing, but I was also a pretty like shy kid. So I think I never necessarily had the courage to put myself out there in that way, but I signed up for it, this like community improv class in Ann Arbor, Michigan. And I walked in, and it was really the first time I remember, like, as an entrepreneur, young entrepreneur, like feeling kind of relaxed, actually, which often surprises people because most people are very intimidated.
That is surprising. I would think it'd be like a pretty stressful, intimidating experience. Yeah.
But this is where it's like, and I think in some ways maybe it surprised me too, but it was just the principles of improv are so freeing and so accepting, where so often in my entrepreneur role, I was like strategizing to think or do the right thing and position this and how do I frame this? And there was always seemingly like a right or wrong way to do things. And in improv, like everything is right, like everything's accepted and embraced and supported. So I didn't have to like think or worry so much about what I was going to say or how I was going to show up. I just got to be me. And not only just like be me, but be in like braced and accepted and supported, right? The whole principle of yes and there are no mistakes. So I could feel it physically in my body, because at that point I was so wound up and tense from like just all the kind of doing and all the things that I was dealing with as an entrepreneur. And so I was just kind of like, oh my God, I just get to like exist. And so I felt so safe and supported. So I was like I was like, this is awesome. And I was also fun, and I really just enjoyed it. And so I ended up going to the second city in Chicago. And, now it's been over 10 years. I've been training and performing and all sorts of things with improv. But what I found early in my improv experience was that the things that I was learning and getting to experience as an improviser were things that were really helping me as an entrepreneur, like being able to be in the moment and not like anticipate so much, but just trust myself, build that trust in myself that whatever came, I'd be able to handle it. And then I was also investing, working at an early stage venture capital firm, and I saw so many other entrepreneurs struggle with these improvisational skills. So then I started putting these worlds together, and that's kind of where it started from.
And so, can you explain exactly what improv comedy is for people who are maybe familiar with the concept of comedy, but less familiar with improv comedy? Like, because you mentioned something that I think is really important is there was nothing you could do that was a mistake, and you felt free for the first time, which I think as an entrepreneur and as someone who, is in front of people a lot, it can be really intimidating. So to me, standing up and having to perform in front of people in a way that I'm not familiar with, it kind of freaks me out. So I love that this was like a freeing moment for you. So explain what improv is, and maybe people can understand why that was so freeing.
Yeah, so improv is like figuring it out in real time. So if you see stand-up comedy or even a scripted comedy show, right? That's written, right? Or it's like they know what they're going to be saying.
Practice
And
rehearsed and
yeah, and improv is just like you're going there and you don't know what this show is going to be about, or you don't know what scene is going to be about, but you figure it out together in real time. And so you're really creating something from nothing, right? You're just there and like figuring out as you go, which who else does that?
yeah,
Entrepreneurs, right?
entrepreneurs. That's right.
Yeah. So it's very parallel. And so the tools we use in improv to come up with that script in real time there are a lot of active listening skills. There's a lot of acknowledging what's been established in the scene and building on it, right? So we continue to build on it versus denying what has happened and then we're just arguing about where we are. Again, with an entrepreneur, it's like accept the reality of your situation so that you can then make choices to move forward. Because if you deny that reality, you can't solve problems, you can't come up with new ideas. And then, of course, in improv comedy, there's this like we want to heighten it to make it funny, right? And there's techniques we use to do that as well. But ultimately, it's about creating something in real time from nothing. And I always tell people if they're like, I don't know if I could do it, I'm not funny. And it's not about being funny. It's just about being present, about like listening, being real and adding and moving things forward. And anyone who can talk to air, like you can improvise, right? It's all made up, right? And that's where it was so freeing because it's like, there's no right or wrong. It just exists and you keep going with the flow.
And I love that correlation. That's so interesting to match improv with entrepreneurship because when you explain it like that, I can see where there are so many benefits because entrepreneurship is in some ways charting down a path that you don't know where it's going, right? I mean, you have a plan, you set goals, but anything can happen at any time and you have to be prepared for it. So talk to me a little bit about how you marry the two together and the work that you do now.
Yeah. So, like, improvisers are creating something from nothing, right? Entrepreneurs are creating something from nothing. Both improvisers and entrepreneurs need to adapt to changing circumstances, build trust among teams or like whoever's on stage with you, communicate clearly, and make decisions with limited information. So, amongst other similarities, but these are like four core things that we have to do as improvisers and entrepreneurs. So, the tools we use as improvisers, the practices, the frameworks, the exercises, the silly games that help us do those things better on stage can be adapted and applied to help us as entrepreneurs do those things better on our stage of like the world and our business, right? So what I've done is I've taken what I've learned and practiced in the improv world, knowing what I know about being an entrepreneur, investing in entrepreneurs, working with entrepreneurs, and sometimes used a literal game, but I'll sometimes adapt the exercise or the principle so that it's specific to what an entrepreneur might need to be better at their job. Just like we use those things to be better at an improviser's job, So, for example, one of my favorite adapted exercises that I do with entrepreneurs is called half pitch. So, there's an exercise in improv called half life where you do a scene, you have maybe like a minute, and then you do that scene, you have some object work, you're like kind of, it's very physical. Maybe you're building something together invisible on stage. And then you have 30 seconds to do that same scene. You have 15 seconds to do that same scene, and it gets shorter and shorter. And it's comedic, right? But it's also shows like what really matters because you have to trim some of the fat in the scene to get to the core of it. So with entrepreneurs, I'll have them do a pitch, a minute long pitch. Then I have them do their pitch for 30 seconds. And then I cut that pitch in half again, 15 seconds, and then 7.5 seconds, and then like 4 seconds. And then I have them do another minute pitch. What this does is it trims the fat. So often as entrepreneurs, we know we're so in the weeds, right? We know all the things and we could talk at length about all the details and the technicalities. But ultimately, a lot of that stuff doesn't matter in a quick pitch to get someone excited about what you're doing. So this exercise, it's so potent, it's so magical. I love like the first minute versus the second minute they do it after they go through the half pitch exercise. It's like the second minute is just like, so, oh my gosh, yeah, it's so much clearer. We know what they do. So that is one of my favorites. And it's such a clear example of how we can take something from the improv world, adapt it slightly to make it specific to helping entrepreneurs with their own improvisational journey as an entrepreneur.
Yeah, I love that. And it has to be unsettling to cut your pitch and down to 4 seconds. How do you get the essence of what you do in 4 seconds, but when you're forced to do it, you do it. I think that's super interesting. I'd love to kind of play around with that on my own and see what happens there. You mentioned something in the beginning where you talked about yes and that there are no mistakes. Can you elaborate on the yes and principle and how that relates to both entrepreneurship and also sales? Because we're all about teaching women to sell around here. And so what is that yes and principle and how can we implement that when dealing with our clients or potential clients in a sales process?
Yeah, I love this question so much. So quickly, like yes and an improv is like acknowledging the reality of the scene, right? Of whatever's been established on stage or in that scene so far, and then building on it, right? So if we're in a scene together and you're like, oh, we're at the bowling alley, and I'm like, yeah, and look, he just threw a strike. Then it's like, oh, I'm acknowledging you established we're in a bowling alley, and I'm adding to that by saying someone has thrown a strike. If I were to say, like, no, we're not, we're at a cafe, like that kind of kills the scene, right? And it's like not fun to watch. Now, when we look at this kind of principle applied outside of this, especially in sales, we can't control the conversation or what someone says, what someone asks us in those conversations, but we can acknowledge like what's happening and the reality and then respond to it. So it takes a deep presence and active listening, and not just listening for our turn to talk, but listening for meaning, understanding the context, the verbal, the nonverbal. So you can see this even with people on stage if they're giving like a sales pitch or presentation. If someone sneezes in the room, a yes and moment would be like, gazoon tight, and then like moving forward, right? Or if you spill water on yourself, acknowledge oh my gosh, I spilled water on myself. I'm always doing this, right? And then go forward with it. Because we've all seen that. Kind of acknowledging that is really powerful in connecting with your audience too. And then of course, there's like very literal, like if someone asks you a question, respond to that question, right? And if someone seems confused, but they don't say they're confused, noticing that, be like, I notice like you seem a little unsure of this. Like, what's going on? Right? That's a yes and moment in a sales conversation. I saw this a lot when I was on the investing side in the venture capital world, where we'd ask a question and the entrepreneur would be like, I'm going to get to that on slide 14. And that's a no. That's like denying the reality that someone asks you a question, is engaged in this part and wants to go down this path. The yes and moment there is like, answer that question, and then go back to your pitch, right? Because the best pitches and the best sales conversations often are conversations and aren't just like following a script sometimes.
Yes, yes. It used to be when I started selling, that's what selling was, is we stood up in front of a room with a presentation and we just gave our spiel. That's what we were trained to do. And it has definitely changed. Sales is much more of a conversation. So I love this yes and approach. And I love about your point of acknowledging the not just the spoken things, but the unspoken, right? The body language, any nonverbal cues that you may be getting. Because a lot of times when you're speaking or when you're pitching or when you're in those moments, you're sort of in some heightened awareness of yourself, but it's super important to take a look around and see what everybody else is doing and how they're reacting. So, what are some other ways that you think improv training can improve active listening or empathy during client interactions?
Generally, like in improvisational practice over time is like going to the gym for empathy building skills, right? And communication skills, whether listening, how you say something, that awareness of yourself and someone else. Like it's a muscle that over time you can get better and better at. Like you can get better at listening, you can get better at kind of that compassion or empathy for others. For example, like when you improvise, you also play different characters, right? So this also allows us to put ourselves in someone's shoes, like kind of almost as literally as possible, right? We're not actually in someone else's shoes, but we're really stepping into that character of like, how might I respond to this if I'm this person or this role? And so oftentimes in the improv programs I run, which are very specific of like improv for some sort of effect or empowering people, not necessarily for the comedy school standpoint of it, although it is fun and funny, but it's like putting some people in scenes that mimic real life situations so they can practice responding in different ways and also train our nervous system to respond differently in different ways. Because it's one way to read a book about how to be more empathetic and be a better listener. It's another to actually practice it, because sometimes it's like we automatically respond in certain ways, and we that's a physical practice, right? Just like a musician practices the guitar or an athlete practices their free throws, we can practice how do we respond when someone gives us feedback that's hard to hear. Do we get defensive? Do we jump into it? If someone asks us a question in a sales meeting that makes us think they're not interested, do we get like really like, oh, wait, and try to, so we get to practice new responses that might get us new results. And part of the way we can do that is building this empathy of like understanding where the other person's coming from. And it also it helps us take things less personally, right? Because we recognize we're all these kind of characters, whether we realize it or not, even in our real lives, and to just kind of play that scene you're in. So that's kind of like the depth of where this can go, is it really becomes a way that we can retrain behaviors, mindsets, patterns of thinking and behaving on a more surface level. How improv can help us in these situations to be a better listener, communicator, and have more empathy is like we do an exercise called first word, last word, where people have a conversation using their partner's last word as their first word. So if I said, hey, today I went to the park, you'd have to use park as your first word. You might say, park your car in the parking lot overnight if you don't want to get a ticket, right? It might say like ticket prices for Taylor Swift were through the roof. And so what this does is it forces us to listen fully to what the other person is saying. It trains our brain to listen fully instead of starting to think about what are we going to say next. So that's like a very specific, like simple exercise that trains that ability to listen and listen better than before. So that's kind of like just the range of how we can start to apply improv to be a better listener, communicator, and have more empathy.
Yeah. And I would think also when you were, talking about building empathy within improv, also getting over fear of failure and rejection, because how you said before, make it not so personal. if you're playing somebody else's role, but then also this concept of there are no mistakes in improv. You're building and you're building and you're building. Because I know that's something that holds a lot of women back from selling in their business is, we're often selling our own services and products. We are the product of what we're selling. So when people say no, that feels really personal and really not good, right? And so we hold back on the selling part in our business. And so some of the things that you're talking about and this idea of role playing and getting good at improv can maybe diminish some of those feelings that a lot of us get as we're selling. I think that's really powerful.
Spot on. Yes. And as I like to say, it's also that reframe, right?
Right.
Because if we see rejection as a negative thing,
Yeah.
then of course it becomes something we fear and we don't want. But if we
Yeah.
can reframe it as a gift, right? In improv, we take everything as a gift.
Yeah.
There's no real positive or negative, right? It's just like it just is, and
Yeah.
we respond to it. It changes the game, right? Like I see, and I try to see, right? I'm always practicing this too. It's like seeing rejection, it's like leading you somewhere you need to be, right? Maybe it wasn't a fit, or in the case of if you're looking for, maybe you need 5 clients a year or 5 customers a year or 5 new ones. And it's like every no gets you closer to a yes. And you may have to contact 100 people, but those no, like it's actually a gift to get the no, because not getting a response is even worse. I think we live in a day and age which that's actually more common than even getting a no.
That is exactly right. And Kat Weaver, who's the founder of Power to Pitch, was on a previous episode and she shared something really similar. And I think it's so powerful. And it has reframed, the two of you have reframed how I think about rejection. And she said rejection is a gift, it's a blessing because that means number one, you had the opportunity to pitch, right? Which not everybody did. You got a meeting. And then what you're saying is like you're getting to know fast, which is something I talk about a lot. And I think if you can take the emotional stigma out and the emotional feeling out of what it means to get a no and kind of turn that around or learn from the no's, you start to see it as a gift and you start to see it as a learning opportunity, right? It's every fail is not a fail. It's like a learn something and start again. And so I think rejection and hearing the no is the same thing. Build on it. What can you learn? Don't take it personal. Might not be no, it might be not right now.
Yeah, absolutely. And like it gets us to where we need to go, and sometimes hindsight, hindsight is 2020, which is such a funny saying now post pandemic. But as we move forward, it will all start to make sense, right? And I think that's the thing that we learn in improv too, and we practice, where we don't know going in what it's going to be, but afterwards, like, oh, cool. Like we see the story come together. And that's how anything new is created, right? Everything is created from nothing. So, in order to create something from nothing, we do have to be really kind of flexible and forgiving of like, there's actually no perfect path. There's no linear path to some of these things. And so I think the more we embrace that in the improvisational practice, the more we can embrace it in our business and sales.
Yeah, that's exactly right. What advice would you give to people who are looking for like improv resources to kind of learn more and to see where they might be able to kind of implement these ideas into their own business and sales practice?
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm obviously biased because I have so many resources that I've created and shared. So I'll start there and then I'll share some others too. But one is, I gave a TED talk about this. So kind of a quick, like, if you want the short version, I would say start there. And then every week I share on Substack called Life Improvised. And I share tools, techniques, like stories of how to apply these in your life and your work. And then if you want to go like another level, is sign up for a class. And so I do a virtual class called How to Handle Anything. It's over 6 sessions and it's virtual, and It's all about using improv techniques. It's an improv class, but specifically applied for like how do you handle anything in your life, difficult conversations, creative problem solving, understanding yourself, some self-awareness, and how do you show up in different situations, kind of building your capacity to improvise and adapt. And then there's also like traditional improv theaters, right? I trained at the Second City in Chicago, in Upright Citizens Brigade in New York, the Groundlings out of LA, and like all sorts of, classes and workshops and theaters around the world. There may be one in your wherever you live. I always say like, and look, I love those classes. They've gotten me to where I am today. I think if you're looking for somewhere where you can just go and experience it and learn a little bit of improv for improv's sake, those are great. If you want to learn, how these skills can be practical for you, you may not get that there. You may either have to make the connection yourself, or again, you come to a place like me. And I know there's other people that do like improv for anxiety or improv for more of the mindfulness piece of it. So there's different resources like that out there as well. And just like the mindset, I'd say if anyone ever reaches out to me, like asking for resources, I try to figure out what's best for them, even if it's not something I offer, because people are looking for different things. And if you want to be in community in person and just have some laughs, like you're probably better off going to just like an improv theater. But if you want to up your sales game or, these skills for dealing with work stuff and life stuff, then maybe I'm a better fit for you in some of our programs.
I love what you're doing. I think it's such an interesting way to coach and support entrepreneurs. And I know you don't just work with entrepreneurs, you do a lot of team and company work also. It's something that I really wasn't familiar with the concept before we met. And I've sort of fallen in love with it because it seems like such a fun team building exercise. I would have loved to have this, when I was working or building a team at a startup. This would have been so fun and such a better use of resources than probably some of the things we did in terms of, getting people to work together and to just loosen up a little bit and while building skills.
No, I appreciate you saying that. I love that you've fallen in love with it. Everyone would benefit from being able to improvise more. There's so much empathy building and adaptability, growth mindset, creativity, and then that connection, right? And I've actually done a study that's in the process of figuring out the publishing piece of it in partnership with a neuroscientist who worked with me. And we did a study where we looked at the physical and mental well-being impacts of improvising over time. So we measured people's sleep quality, heart rate, activity levels, and then also their feeling connected, feeling energized, creative. And I won't spoil the whole report. It will come out at some point, but it did improve people's sleep quality and physical and mental health. People felt more creative and connected, less alone, and also were sleeping better. So, and having more activity. So I think there's like tremendous benefits for individuals and a team, in terms of creating that cohesion and that trust. And of course, it's a little bit more fun and engaging than perhaps a PowerPoint presentation from some sort of training.
Definitely. I would definitely agree to that. And also, yeah, I mean, just as like a study of one, you as an entrepreneur who learned about improv and took a class and felt that immediate relief, I'm sure that triggered, this idea of studying the behavior and the impact of what this does to you, because I believe it. I think the more you can do to build your confidence and your resilience around things not going your way or having to sort of improvise, I think makes you a better, stronger, happier leader and entrepreneur. So I love this.
Absolutely. I love that quote. I feel like it's like,
Yeah.
it needs to be on my, in a
Yeah.
little promo, right? It does.
Mary, where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find me online. They can chooseimprove.com is our website. I'm sure it'll be in the show notes. You can find me on LinkedIn, and occasionally you can find me stuck in traffic in Los Angeles. But yeah, those are great ways to find me. My email is mary@chooseimprove.com. Feel free to reach out. The Substack, I'll include that link in the show notes too, so that there's so many ways you can find me and connect. And would love to hear from anyone who wants to learn more or find ways this could help them too.
And I encourage everyone, if you are interested in building your empathy, building your resilience, building your improv skills, to find Mary. We will put everything in the show notes. And it's been so fun talking to you. This is a really beneficial and sort of different spin on sales than maybe what people are expecting. And I love to give people a little something unexpected. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I hope this has been helpful and excited to be here. So thanks so much for having this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Girls Make Bank. If you like what you've heard, please remember to subscribe, like, and follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen. Please review and share our show to help spread the word and help your girls make bank. And I'd love to hear from you. Connect with me on LinkedIn or Instagram, or visit honeybeesgroup.co. Until next time, friends.